listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your resource to better understand and execute successful podcast ad campaigns. Hello and welcome to the Podcast Advertising Playbook. I'm your host, Heather Osgood. Today, I am joined by Lauren Passell, the founder of Tink Media. Lauren, welcome to the program.
Heather, I have been a fan and a listener of this show for so long. I can't believe I'm here. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. And remind me, you've been in the podcast industry for a hot minute now. How long has it been?
Tink just turned 6 years old this month, a couple weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then I was doing a little bit, I started my newsletter. I had a podcast. I was just a fan first. That's actually, I think, a lot of the reasons why I've found success, because I really was a fan of audio first. And a lot of things fell into place from that. I had a podcast called Podcast a little before its time, like when no one was listening at all. So like pre-serial. So I've been a listener for a long time.
If my memory serves me right, and I'm sure LinkedIn would tell me, but you worked in PR for a publishing company before this, right?
Well, the funny thing is I wasn't in PR. I did a lot of strange things. It was like a random job. I did their social media. I was in acquisition board meetings. Like I was not on the PR side, but they knew I loved podcasts because I had this podcast. I had Podcast, the newsletter. And so the PR team, they knew that they should be pitching their authors to podcasts, but they didn't understand how to do it. And so they would come up to me and say, "Hey, Lauren, can you pitch David Sedaris to get on some podcasts to promote his new book?" And I was like, "Yes, please." Like I do that in my dreams, And I'll never forget the first time I emailed Anna Sale and she responded. And that was actually a humongous light bulb moment for me, because to me, Anna Sale is a humongous celebrity that would never respond to me. She responded. And I was like, I can do this. I can make this happen. Like it seemed wild to me that that's all it took. And so I started doing it at the publishing house. So originally when I left there to go work for a podcast company, and then I started Tink, and at first it was just for authors trying to get on podcasts. And it just keeps on evolving, because what ended up happening was a lot of the podcasts I was pitching my clients to would say, "Can you get me on podcasts to talk about my podcast?" And they would start asking me questions, and I'd be like, "What, is no one doing this stuff?" And the answer was usually no. And so it took a lot of coming up with solutions and, hiring people that loved and understood audio and fixing problems that I was hearing that was happening. And really, I think because I come from the point of being a listener has helped, but also maybe that I didn't have a PR background, because I think a lot of rules have had to be broken. And so I didn't have any of those rules embedded in my brain. So at Tink, we've really invented a lot of stuff. And now there's 8 of us.
Wow, that's amazing. So tell me a little bit about what your company looks like today. What are your primary services?
It's mostly podcast marketing and PR. So I think everything goes into those 2 buckets. We work with people in all sorts of ways, but really sometimes a show just needs a PR push. And that's usually if it's a brand new show, a brand new season, even a mini series or something that we can get excited about. And we can get excited about a lot of stuff. If the podcaster has a book coming out, something like that. And then we're pitching the show to podcast listening apps so that it will be featured. We're pitching our clients to be interviewed on other podcasts, and we're pitching media so that there will be write-ups. However, we're not typically pitching big media outlets like the New York Times. Honestly, we don't think it converts like people think it will, and it's not our lane. So if someone comes to me saying that's their goal, I'm like, then go get a traditional publicist. I know where the podcast listeners are, and those are the people that convert. It's hard to convert a non-listener to a listener. It's much easier to convert the people that are already like, I love podcasts, I have my favorite listening app, and I have my routine in the mornings when I listen. It's easy to convert those people. Then there's the marketing angle, which is my favorite thing, and that is cross promotion, which is working with similar audiences. And I could go on and on and on about that. But sometimes someone needs both, a mixture of both, just one.
I always say that podcast listeners listen to podcasts. And to me, I think that I just have found that is true over and over again. are we out there trying as an industry to convert new listeners and to get new people listening to podcasts? Absolutely. Do we want more people to listen to podcasts? Absolutely. But I think that for audience growth, if you're reaching somebody who's already super familiar with podcasts, that love podcasts, and I think that there's also almost a sweet spot, right? Like you've got listeners like you and I that have podcasts playlists like out the yin yang, right? Where it's like we can't get through all of our shows in one week. But then you have people that it's like, oh yeah, I listen to one or two shows and they are ripe for new shows, right? Like they want new shows. They just maybe don't know how to find them. Or when something comes up that's interesting, they're more likely to engage. So it sounds like that's what you have found as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is hard to find. I think that Apple Podcasts, they've now split out their new and noteworthy to top shows and new shows. And I think that's a great move because we get to see we are listening to and what they're curating. I think they do a pretty good job for the app, what we've had before. But still, even with that, it's really hard to just make one of the charts, have it make an impact. Or if you're just a casual listener finding something, I don't think enough people are writing about podcasts. My team, we joke, like we have a lot of podcast newsletters, the Tink people. We can't pitch to ourselves. We need more people writing. We need the New York Times to have a podcast newsletter, so I think discoverability I like to think it's not a problem. You need to market more if you think discoverability is a problem, but it actually is a problem. At the heart of everything I do is helping people discover something. That's where it all started. And it's still at the heart of everything I'm doing.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I absolutely love about podcasts is just the engagement level. And I feel like that's something I could talk about all day, every day, is that when you put podcasts up against every other medium out there, time spent with podcasting is very, very high. And it really fosters, I think, a high level of engagement. And in this world where I think, we're getting these like bite-sized content pieces thrown at us constantly, creating deep content that has a deep connection with its audience is really super powerful. And I think that engagement is the cornerstone for audience growth. I think engagement is the cornerstone for success with advertisers. If you're talking to a show and maybe you get the feeling that they really just don't have a super engaged audience, what are some tips or recommendations that you would give them to really help create more engagement?
First of all, I'm glad you brought this up and I wonder what you think about this, because I've been telling a lot of my clients to consider looking at numbers other than just download numbers. I think for the longest time, people were just coming up to us and only looking at that. And how long are they listening? And the engagement, it's really, really important, because the most engaged people are going to be the people that tell their friends about you, which is the best way actually to grow a podcast, getting people's friends. That's the best recommendation possible. So really, we want more of those people. Focus on those really hardcore fans. I think just listening and responding is the best way. What I've learned from marketing, obviously, is that you can't just put out an episode and walk away. There's so much that has to be done with the interacting, bringing in listeners' stories into the content if possible. If you could get listeners to send in a 5-minute voice note with a story tied to your theme, that could be a bonus episode or a mini episode. And it makes people feel invested in the show and part of the show. Asking your audience what they want, doing a survey. I don't think people do enough surveys. Ask them what they want to hear. They'll feel part of it. So I feel like including their stories, making them feel part of the show and making them feel invested, stating your goals. I'm trying to get to this many Patreon subscribers. Can you help me? Being really transparent about that stuff. And then another thing, being transparent about the call to action, because I feel like as a listener, I'm hearing subscribe to my podcast, follow me on all of these platforms, sign up for my newsletter. I can't do it all. Pick one or two. And you always hear, tell a friend about this podcast. You hear that all the time. And I'm always like, when me and my friends are all talking about podcasts, because unless you're me and you, that isn't happening.
It doesn't just come up in conversation, right?
No. So say text this to a friend who fill in the blank. What if you did that every single time? And it was just like, be really specific, because then someone's brain will go, oh, I have a friend who just got married. I'm going to text this to her right now. Their phone is probably in their hand. So I also just think breaking the rules a little bit of what every other podcast is doing that will make people's brains go, oh my gosh, get their attention a little bit.
Yeah, I like that a lot. One of the things that, as you were talking, I was thinking about is that, and I find that this happens with advertising as well. If somebody comes to you with a product that isn't, I guess, marketable, it's very difficult to grow an audience for them, right? And I feel like I said, it's the same thing with advertisers, right? If a brand comes to us and their site is bad and it's really difficult to navigate, and I take one look and I think, people aren't going to buy from this website, and it doesn't have anything to do with getting the message out there. It has to do with the actual company, the product, the way that you set it up. So I feel like a lot of what you just covered in that has to do with not even as much around like, hey, how do we build an audience, but how do you take those people? And I always love going back to like that 1,000 true fans concept, right? It's like, how do you get 1,000 people to be your fans and to love you and love the content that you're creating? And from there, you can go anywhere, everywhere. So I guess I'm curious, when you're thinking, and I know we were talking specifically about audience engagement, which I think is the cornerstone, but how do you take a show and kind of examine it and say, these are the things that we need to tweak in order for it to be marketable, in order for it to really grow that audience or get that listen through rate? Are there ways that you approach that? Because that seems like that would be kind of tricky.
Yeah, it's really important. We do have something we call podcast therapy, which is consulting. It is therapeutic at times, and people are talking about their art. So sometimes there's some emotion. If someone says that they're not growing, we take a look and we're like, okay, why? And a lot of the times it's for the reasons you're saying. And that's when we ask them to do podcast therapy first, so we can really dig in and examine what's going on. A lot of times, I think it's not enough care into something that might seem obvious to you and me as podcast listeners, but like cover art is, I think, really important. Please don't have a microphone. There's exceptions, obviously, but there's a lot of microphones on podcasts that aren't about podcasting in any way. We don't see like film projectors on movie posters, like that's something we know it's a podcast. We're on the app listening, like maybe on your website or something, but like we know it's a podcast. You don't have to tell us. So stuff like that, I think sometimes that people aren't in it as much as we are from an outside perspective hearing that. I think the sound quality, I think people underestimate how important the sound quality is.
I agree.
It didn't used to be this important. It's a good thing, but now people will turn it off,
Yeah.
so that's really important. My favorite thing to help people with the content and to make it more marketable is thinking, how can we insert opportunities for cross promotion into your editorial so that it doesn't feel like they're being beat over the head with a cross promotion? How can we, is there a segment? Oh my gosh, there's this podcast called Queens, which is a women's history podcast.
We represent them.
Oh, oh my God. Oh, do you know how many times this happens that I brag about this show and people are like, oh yeah, like
They're great.
they're so great. They have a show or a segment, they drink and swear on their show. And they have a segment at the beginning that's like warnings, don't listen in front of your kids. They have other podcasters read the content warning at the beginning. That's a perfect example of a way that they creatively thought, how can I get another podcaster in front of here? And then in return, that other podcaster will do a promo for them. That's so fun. So can we do, if podcasters don't have interviews, what can you offer? What can you offer to other podcasts if you want something from them? Because really what's working is borrowing audiences, period. If you ask me to say what works, I'd say borrowing audiences. So you're going to have to give something back. None of my pitch letters are greedy. I'm looking at every single one, like, how are we working together? Believe if you find two audiences that overlap and you both are willing to collaborate, you will find a way to swap audiences. You just have to be a little creative about it. So figuring out what that means for each show, each individual show.
I totally agree with you 100%. And I think that kind of dovetails well into the next kind of point that I wanted to talk about, which is the interview-based podcast, right? And I feel like we did a lot of recaps at the end of 2024, like we all do in the industry, which is super fun. They're fun to read. They're fun to create. I definitely felt like there was not a whole group, but there was definitely voices that said, the interview podcast is dead. Don't do it. Don't start it. And then there was another camp that was like, the interview podcast is amazing. Like it's just going to grow. And I know that you had created a piece kind of talking all about the interview podcast. Tell us a little bit about what your thoughts are.
I am so glad we get to talk about this. Tim Ferriss, I'm not really a follower of Tim Ferriss, but a lot of people are. And he kind of made this bold post at the end of last year, a blog post saying that he is changing the way he's interviewing his guests on his podcast. And he's so enormous. I think that he has 4 rules. I think they're really actually make it maybe harder for me as a publicist, but makes the quality better and forces all publicists to be more creative, which is a good thing. So I also just think it will trickle down because I think it's a good trend. I think it'll make stuff better, more interesting, and people will listen to what he's doing. People will listen to this blog post. So the first one is that no more traditional book tours where you see the same author on every single podcast. Tim Ferriss will only have an author on a podcast, like in rare instances, if it's like 4 months before the book comes out, or if it's a friend. There's always exceptions to these rules, but basically they're on a book tour. He's not doing it, which by the way, would have been very stressful to me when I was working in book publishing. However, I think it's going to make great content. How often do you see the same person on every podcast? It's like, I don't need this. So the second one is a really cool one called the barbell strategy. It's called the barbell strategy because it's weighted at both sides. He's only going to interview people that 90% of people know about or that 10% of people know about. So that's like Beyonce or like some diamond in the rough that he found that no one else has gotten to know. Amazing. The third one was living legends. So yeah, if you get Dolly Parton, I mean, Heather, if you get Dolly Parton, get Dolly Parton. Okay. And then the last one is finding inventive ways to have interviews. I think his example was having an interview in a jacuzzi or something, but it gets you thinking, right? Can we bring in some real sound? Can we have it in a different place? Something like that. So I'm excited about those rules. Even if it makes my job a little bit harder as a publicist, it makes me more excited as a listener.
Yeah, I agree. As you and I've talked about, obviously big podcast consumer, but also I listen to a ton of books. And I will say it is probably one of my favorite hobbies to listen to a podcast interview and then say, I love this interview. The person's got a book. I'm going to go listen to their book. And I would say 75% of the time when I go and listen to their book, I love their book because I loved the podcast and I loved the topics. Sometimes I'm like, I got the podcast. I didn't need to listen to the book because the book was just the longer version of the interview and I already got all the main points. But I do get very annoyed when it's like, oh, look, that person's on this show and that show and that show and that show. And all the interviews are going to be the same. They're talking about the same thing. So it makes it difficult for me as a listener to decide what to listen to when in the next 6 weeks, everybody's interviewing the same person. So it's like once you listen to one interview, you can skip the others because you've already listened to it and it's going to be essentially the same thing. So I loved him and I do listen to his show, not super religiously, but fairly consistently. And he does do a good job, I think, of interviewing, period. But I love that he is a bit of an innovator. And for me, selfishly, I hope that the podcast interview never goes away because it is literally my favorite part of podcasting. Like, yes, I want to be entertained, but for me as a business owner, I am able to sit in a room, a virtual room, and listen to a conversation that I would never be part of in another format. And I love it to death. And I hope it doesn't go away. And as we were mentioning, interview podcasts do give you a really good style to help do cross promos, right? Obviously, there are a lot of authors that go on shows, but podcasters can go on podcasts, obviously, all day long and help promote their podcast. And so there's a lot of value to the interview show. And it sounds like you agree with that.
Oh my gosh, so much. I think we need everything to have a healthy ecosystem. There's so many people that only listen to interviews. The turnaround is good enough that we can have lots of them, right? You don't need to spend 8 months making a few episodes of something. It's an important part of the ecosystem. It's so much fun. I love them too. What is your favorite interview podcast? Is this
Diary of a CEO?
Okay. I seen, and also I'm like listening to myself talk about Tim Ferriss. Do I love Tim Ferriss? I don't actually know I've listened. So I think I need to start listening because the one time he writes something, I'm like, this is genius. I think I need to convert myself.
Yeah, no, he is very good. I started listening to Stephen Bartlett a while ago before he got bigger. And, I sometimes I'm like, I don't want to listen to a show because everybody's listening to a show, but it's really, really good. And the reason that it's really, really good, I'm listening to a show right now with this like biomedical scientist, and she's telling you all of these really specific ways about how not to age. Like he gets guests on his show that are amazing. And I also personally love the long form. Like I'm down for the 2 hours. Like I would much rather take a 2 hour interview than a 10-minute interview any day. But what's your favorite
And
interview show?
well, just before we move on to my favorite, I think you just mentioned something really important too, that we now have 2 hours so we can really get to, like you can really get to know the person. I feel like before podcast interviews were such a big thing, when one of our authors was going through a press thing, it was like the same, we didn't have time. There was no flexibility to really get to, you heard the funny story on the, Tonight Show or whatever. It's like, it is really, really important for that. And also I've heard about Diary of Your CEO that they do such good research in what's working and what's not working on that show, like incredible research. So that's another important thing that shows should be doing, testing everything. I don't think enough people are
Hmm.
testing everything. I know that they are freaks about testing.
Hmm.
So my favorite interview show is, oh my gosh, can I have a second?
Of course.
Wait, because I wrote Life Hacker. I forgot to mention, I also write for Life Hacker. I just wrote an article about the best interview podcasts, and I want to look up what I said. Oh, okay, here we go. I really love Search Engine, PJ Votes Search Engine. I find every single episode something I really want to talk about. Panic World is a new podcast about the internet I really enjoy. I think Death, Sex, and Money. I mean, Anna Sale, I mentioned her at the beginning, still a humongous fan of Death, Sex, and Money. And then I think I have to mention Bullseye with Jesse Thorne. I think that that is maybe the most underrated interview podcast there is. He interviews guests that he's making his own rules that he actually wants to interview that are nowhere. And sometimes I'm like, I didn't even, it gets an obscure like hip hop artist or something like that. And that Jesse is just a true fan of, and he's a great conversationalist. He founded Max Fun. So anyway, I could go on, but a few favorites. Yes, I
Yeah.
also love the interview podcast.
Yeah, yeah. No, those are awesome. So I guess one of the things that I have seen happen over and over, and I'm curious if you have seen this too, is that hosts think that if they get a really big guest on their show, that their show is going to blow up, and it does not work. I think, and what made me think of that was, that last show that you mentioned where he kind of interviews nobodies. I think that your audience likes you as the host of the show. I think they want to hear more from you as the host. And I think that they love big names coming on, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, I think you want your audience to be a bigger fan of you than your guests.
Say louder for the people in the back. I completely agree. In fact, I sometimes will tell clients like, if you're looking at your metrics and you're an interview podcast and your numbers are wildly different, you might need to look into that and see if it's because people are just tuning in for the guest and not you, because you need them tuning in for you. With Jesse Thorne, I'm not even looking at the guest name. I'm listening to it because Jesse's a great interviewer. And if he cares about it, this is going to be amazing. And I'm probably going to care about it too. As opposed to some other shows where I'm really not listening, but I'm just looking for the guest. Another thing that happens is because we talk about social media a lot with clients, and they'll say, oh my gosh, get this, we're going to get Beyonce. Okay. And we know her agent's agent, and Beyonce is going to be on the show, and then she's going to tweet about it. And I don't even know where to begin to tackle all the problems in that statement. But it's like, first of all, no, she's not your agent, whatever. We'll get over that. No, she's not. Second of all, even if she's probably not going to promote it, because that's another problem I hear podcasters say, that their guests don't promote, as even if they make it pretty simple. And third of all, Beyonce's followers are not, this goes back to the whole, it's hard to convert a non-listener to a listener. Most of them are probably not podcast listeners. I mean, not, I shouldn't say that. Who knows? They're not all
Right.
going to go listen.
Right.
So we've now narrowed it down to such a few group of people that are actually, and you know what? They might listen and then never listen again. So there's just, yeah, absolutely. And everything comes down to, is it a good story? Is it a good episode? That's the only thing that matters. That's the only thing that matters. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. Yeah. We're definitely on the same page. And it's really interesting because I do think often content creators, they kind of create in a bubble and they need to do a better job of looking out and looking at the industry and seeing what's working.
I love that you are a podcast listener, because when I'm at Podcast Movement, I always ask people what they're listening to give me a recommendation for my newsletter. I can't tell you how many people get this look of fear in their eyes, like they don't listen. And I think to work in the industry, and I mean, you don't have to, clearly you don't have to love podcasts, but it really does help. So if you're a podcaster, become a listener too. That's another piece of advice I give people if I don't get the sense that they know what's out there.
Absolutely. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. Do you feel like brands use podcasting as a PR source enough, or do you think that it's not even like podcasts aren't even on their radar?
I don't think people are thinking about how important it is at all. I mean, PR or marketing, I think it's kind of an afterthought for a lot of people. I think actually people think about PR more than the marketing.
Yeah,
and
I do too.
Because people are like, well, I want to be on podcast to talk about my podcast. But guess what? A PR campaign for a podcaster isn't going to work in every scenario. Some people are much easier to pitch than others. And I won't promise to get people on 1 million podcasts if I don't think they're super pitchable. But every podcast can do marketing. And so I feel like sometimes people want the splashy PR thing. I mean, I can always pitch to newsletters and Apple podcasts and stuff like that. But like, I think people don't think enough about what's really going to work in the long term, which is the marketing, the audience borrowing. And the thing is, that takes work and it takes time. I think people want that quick hit. Get me on Apple Podcasts and then it'll blow up, right? Just that's all I want. It's like, okay, that can be part of this bigger plan. But also people are coming, sometimes they'll say, we launched the show 6 months ago. It's not growing. It's like, we needed to think about marketing first, because also if we can bake some things into the content even, or the longer lead time you have for marketing and PR, the better. I'm starting to see people prioritize it more, but it still is shocking to me. And how much teams think, well, we have a company. We'll be like, well, we have a marketing team. Yeah, but they don't know podcasts.
No.
And unfortunately, it's wildly different. So
yeah,
I'm always crossing my fingers for more interest in prioritizing it, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that has kind of come up for me, probably in the last year is, and it certainly is not a light bulb moment for most people probably, but it was a light bulb moment for me where I realized that part of the issue we have with podcast growth is that there isn't an algorithm that is feeding us content. And if after I listen to Diary of a CEO at the end, I mean, Audible is even doing it now, right? So like I'll listen through my book and of course I'm always doing something while I'm listening. And so I might not be able to turn it off immediately. And Audible will say, we have a title recommendation for you based on your listening habits. And it'll start playing like the preview of another book. And once that preview expires, it'll give me another preview and it'll say, here's another one, right? And of course, I'm like, I need to turn this off and get back to what I want to actually listen to. But like Audible is doing this. Why are we not doing this in podcasting, right? I get that like maybe Audible is obviously one platform. It's easy for them to go through and say, hey, if this person listened to this book, they're probably going to be interested in this book too, right? It knows my listening habits very intimately. But couldn't we in podcasting say, hey, Heather, you just finished this episode of Diary of a CEO. Now, based on the fact that you like this show, and oh, by the way, we can see you're subscribed to all of these other shows that are in the business category. What if it just gave me 3 recommendations when I was done with everything? But it doesn't. Like, why do we not have an algorithm? We could take it back to the fact that like Apple doesn't necessarily care about us growing our podcast audiences. I don't know if Spotify does either, but I guess what's your take, or have you given that any consideration about the fact that we're living in a day and age where we're very used to being fed content? And part of why podcasts don't grow more is because we're not fed podcasts.
Pure poetry, Heather. I mean, the tech is behind. I completely agree with you. And that is basically half of everything I've gotten into was the human response to that. Basically, I started podcast and newsletter because I was like, my app is not showing me things. I'm not hearing these things. So I guess I'm going to have to spend 25 hours a week writing about. It's funny because every time a podcaster, I listen to a podcast and they're like, tell your friends about us. I'm like, oh, or start a newsletter and write and spend half of my life writing. Like I'm with my hands trying to help discoverability because the tech isn't doing it. So I absolutely, yeah, I think I'm always waiting for to have more transparency about the priorities of the listening apps because they clearly have different priorities that aren't helping us discover and help. That's so smart what you just said. And I don't know if this is exactly what you were saying, but you just gave me an idea because I remember that from book publishing and also did ebooks. You could taste the next book at the end of an ebook.
Yes. I mean, right. They even put them in at the end of a book, right? If I like Hannah Smith at the end of her book, I can read the preview of the next chapter of another book. Like,
Oh my
it
God.
seems
And
pretty simple.
yes, and those Ellen Hildebrand readers could not buy the next book if they got the first chapter. Could not. And
Right.
I've never thought about this because I think going back to the idea of like the human response to this lack of tech is why I'm hand doing promo swaps and hand doing creative feed swaps or triangulations of those things. But I had never thought about, okay, so a fiction show has ended. What if we went to that creator and said, can we put the first 10 minutes of this new fiction show at the end or something like that? Like where it's not
Really
just a
good
promo,
idea.
but it's actually like start listening up. Okay. It's kind of people do that when they have a Patreon and they're putting walled content up on their public feed for like 10 minutes. What if we did that on other shows? I don't know if I've ever seen that quite done before where the end of doesn't even have to be fiction. Have you seen that done before? Cause you just thought of that. That's very smart.
No, I haven't. So I've got a group of podcasters that we work with right now that are buying post rolls because everybody in the industry is like post rolls don't work. Nobody wants to buy a post roll, blah, blah, blah. As is evidenced by my lack of turning my book off when it ends. It's the same thing with podcasts for me, right? Like I get to the end and I keep listening. I'm not sure. I'm sure it's because I'm busy doing something, but like why, like post rolls have worked really well for these shows to grow their audiences in part because they're paying really low CPMs for them, right? Like we're paying like $5, $8 CPMs for post rolls. But like you said, why not? Instead of saying like, hey, come and listen to this podcast, why not have that post roll? And I would have to do some research because I don't know about how long a post roll can be, but why not have the post roll just be, you could do it almost like a feed drop, right? That's a good idea, Lauren. You should try that out.
No, that's a good idea, Heather. Genius. I love it so much. And you're so right about you're like, am I alone in the fact that I'm hearing them because I'm busy, but aren't we all? Like, that's why people are listening, right? Like so
Mhm.
common. And I love hearing that affirmation about the post. I love hearing you talk about this because I think this is not my specialty, but people ask me about it all the time. And I'm like, I guess don't do post roll because I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like I've never really had a good answer to why. I've just like absorbed that tip from others. So yeah, you changed my mind about that. So that's totally
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Well, I think that, like, if we go back to listener stats and listen through rates, obviously 100% of your audience isn't listening through to the end. But part of what you also have to look at is like the cost benefit analysis, right? And so if you're buying a feed drop, how much are you paying? If you're buying a mid roll, how much are you paying? If you're buying a post roll, maybe you're not getting 100% of their audience, but you're paying a fraction of the cost for that placement. So you could buy more. Yeah,
And
I really think there's value.
maybe there's, I don't know, this, please argue with me about this because I'm not sure as the words are coming out of my mouth, but you might be getting the listeners that are super dedicated too, like a section of listeners, if you wait till the end, that are so invested, or that so they're so invested that they have listened to the whole thing. You're getting those people, or so busy that they have listened to the whole thing and need another podcast. Like you're kind of also self-selecting the people that are more likely.
Right. Right. Because I feel like that's what happens for me, is that I get to like, and again, personal listening habits. I want to listen to a 2-hour podcast episode because it's going to take me through my morning walk and my morning getting ready and my evening, evening walk or my evening chore doing. I don't want to listen to a 15-minute episode and then, okay, now what am I going to listen to next? What am I going to listen to next? Right. So I like that it covers more time, but when I'm finished with it, and I would guess this is what most people do, is like, I'm finished with this. What am I going to listen to next?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, so the tech's not there yet, but that I always think about this. It's like people get frustrated with podcast discovery, but the fact that the tech isn't helping us means it's in the podcaster's hands. So that
True.
can either be frustrating and make you mad, or you can see it as an opportunity to take the cross promotion into your own hands, do it yourself. It could be even better that way. I even just start, this is so weird that I do this. If I notice shows that I think these people need to know about this show, these people need to know about this show, I will, in the Apple Podcasts review, be like, if you're reading this and you like the show, go listen. I'm doing cross promos in Apple Podcasts comments, because I'm like, you guys, there's other stuff out here. I listen to so much stuff that not everyone is going to make that connection. So anyway, we all need to work hard to do it.
Right. We do. We do. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. If people are interested in subscribing to your newsletter or working with Tink, where is a good place for them to find you?
Thanks for having me. I actually took some tips away and you made me think about things in a new way. And I had so much fun. The best way is at tinkmedia.co. You can find everything we do. And then podcastthenewsletter.substack.com is my podcast recommendation newsletter. And if you have a podcast, feel free to pitch me. I need people to pitch me their podcast so I can write about them. And I'm always happy to talk, and I'm always happy to hear what podcasters are struggling with, excited about, etc.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode, and I hope you got some interesting ideas, because it was a really creative conversation. So thanks for being here, and we will catch you again next time. Thank you for listening to the Podcast Advertising Playbook, your source to a better understanding of the podcast advertising industry.